Welcome to the Bouquet Toss, the podcast that helps you plan your wedding day your way. We're your hosts, Jessica
and Sari, and each episode we pick apart the traditions and trends that you either love, hate, or don't understand to help us all figure out why we do weddings the way that we do. The Bouquet Toss is part of the Love Stories TV podcast network.
This episode is brought to you by Brightco. From your engagement ring to your wedding day, protect your most cherished memories with Brightco. Visit bright.co/toss for a fast, free quote today and unlock peace of mind knowing you're covered.
What are we talking about today, Jess?
We're talking about wedding insurance.
Wedding insurance. And if you're asking yourself, do I need wedding insurance?
The answer is yes.
A resounding yes.
Resounding.
All right, let's get into it. I think that probably the most common misconception here is that people are like, I don't want another expense. I don't want to pay for anything else. Do I really need this?
Right.
It is so affordable.
Mm-hmm.
Like, we're talking $100, maybe less.
Mm-hmm.
So I think, all right, let's get into the nitty gritty of it.
Yeah.
The way that you get insurance is based on the size of the venue and basically how much spend you're expecting, right?
Yeah, like the scope of your event,
literally. So if you are spending more, it'll be a little bit more, but it's on a very reasonable scale.
Mm-hmm.
I think when I was looking, there were some options up to like $300, $400, maybe even $500, but as low as like $75 or $100.
Right. And, you know, at the end of the day, if you're spending, 20, 30, however much thousands of dollars you're spending, it's a small fraction of that overall spend.
Yep.
And God forbid the unexpected happen, you'll be protected and you'll get your money back.
Right. So what are some of the unexpected things that could happen?
So one of the big things that wedding insurance can cover is cancellations. Whether it's a vendor not showing up or, a venue gets damaged or closes unexpectedly. We've heard so many stories of this over the years, and especially during, COVID times, or there's been situations where venues have burned down or been destroyed in a hurricane.
Or foreclosed
upon. And these couples are left high and dry unless they had a wedding insurance policy.
Yeah. So just to be clear, cancellation is not on your side.
Yeah.
It is from other, you can't just decide we're canceling the wedding for any reason, which
right.
There's
it's
lots
not
of
like
reasons
for calling off your wedding.
Right. So cancellation meaning somebody else involved makes it impossible for the event to continue.
Mm-hmm.
I think that it is a thing that because of COVID now is a little bit more common to be written into your contract.
Mm-hmm.
So I think that's also why some people maybe don't think they need anything on top of what is available, because it is common for there to be contingencies within the actual contract. And a lot of venues will give you you can reschedule up until probably, I think it's within the same calendar year.
Mm-hmm.
If they have to cancel for any reason, then you're covered in the sense that you can move it to another date that does work. However, that's only then for the venue.
Right.
So that doesn't include now that you need your photographer and your florist and your hair and makeup and all these other people to change the date.
Yeah.
And if it's not written into their contract, then you could lose the money there.
Right. It's really important to make the distinction between, a lot of venues do come with some sort of insurance policy for the venue that covers potentially liability for things that could happen at the event or damage at the property, but that's not going to cover everything. And so you would need to have a separate wedding insurance policy on top of whatever your venue has.
Right. So let's get into that because I think that's a little bit people can feel a little scared when they hear about liability insurance because I think maybe you don't even really think about that. They're like, oh, I'm planning a party and this place does, parties all the time. I'm not responsible.
Right.
Or even if you're planning it in your backyard, you just don't really think about that.
Yeah.
If you are doing it at a home, there's already home insurance, home liability insurance that you should be covered by.
Right.
But if you're doing it even in a public space or a venue that maybe is a non-traditional wedding venue, maybe they don't do weddings all the time, but you've kind of turned it into that, they may not have something that you are covered by. And by you being the person that is bringing all of these people together, you end up being liable for injuries or damage or anything that could happen.
Right. And also, even if you are hosting a wedding at home and you would like to think that your home insurance policy might cover you, but when you are hosting an event, there could be clauses in your contract that, don't cover circumstances like that. And especially when you are throwing an event where alcohol is being served, like if somebody injures themselves on your property, whatever the case might be, you never want to imagine that someone in your life that you would be close enough to invite to your wedding would maybe take legal action against you for something. But for a very small, relatively, fee, you can protect yourself in case it does.
Right. I think that's the big distinction here is that, like, it's really affordable to get, and it just goes a long way for that, like, peace of mind and, like, the just in case of it all.
Yeah.
I think that another misconception is people think it's only for, like, a huge, big blowout wedding where there's, like, 300 people.
Right.
But truly, like, any size this would be applicable to.
Yeah. And like we mentioned, like for such a small, amount of money, it's just worth it to have the peace of mind, no matter what size your event is.
People are probably thinking, all right, great. Now it covers anything, right? I have this thing, I paid $200 and now I'm set. But like, what are the little details that they should really know about what is indeed covered?
Yeah, there's specific things, and you're going to have to check your policy, obviously. Yes. There are options where you might just choose a liability policy, and you have to add on like the cancellation or postponement insurance, which some companies do offer like that specifically. And typically, like we mentioned, it's like would only cover if the wedding must be postponed or canceled due to like unforeseen circumstances, like out of control. And, I think COVID really changed a lot of like wedding insurance policies and procedures because that became such a widespread, situation that impacted countless couples and small businesses alike. And so I think they've put into, I feel like we talked about this when we had Kuhnby on the show.
Yes.
About the force majeure, which is like that unforeseen, couldn't be predicted type of event that would, enable that policy to come into play.
Like a natural disaster.
Right. God forbid.
Yeah. But what about like, if you, this is like sad to think about, but like, God forbid you have like somebody close to you pass away and you just can't imagine going forward with the wedding because like that, like it's so soon before, like it's, what about that?
Right. I mean, that's a great question, and maybe something we can ask our expert. I don't know the answer.
All right. Well, we'll definitely have to ask. Something I think also to just think about is if you're not the only person financially contributing to the wedding, you have to just make sure, because this may not cover the costs that they have provided unless you're including that in like the actual overall number that you claim as the cost of the wedding. But if you do, like, you could be also helping them, if something happens, like this is also helping protect their money too.
Right. I mean, any number of things could potentially go wrong, whether it's, weather related stuff. Back when I planned my wedding, 16 years ago, I wanted an outdoor wedding. We got the tent so that we were prepared in case of rain. But it rained the entire week leading up to the event, and they could not put the tent up.
Because of like mud?
Because of mud.
Yeah.
And there was no way they were going to have the guests tramping around in the grass and the mud.
You didn't want your dress in that anyway.
No, I didn't. And it was kind of a nightmare. I did not get wedding insurance. So hindsight, like, I don't know what I would have done differently. I didn't really have like a contingency plan other than the tent.
Right.
So,
Yeah, but how would insurance have helped in that situation?
I don't know.
All right. We're going to have to ask the experts to find out.
Well, I think we have quite a few questions that we could really use the advice of an expert on to get clarity on what's covered, what's not, and all of the crazy scenarios that could require the help of wedding insurance. So we're going to talk to someone from Brightco to give us some expert advice.
Can't wait.
Let's talk about protecting life's most meaningful moments. Whether it's your engagement ring or your wedding day, Brightco has you covered with fast, easy, and affordable insurance. Brightco is the modern insurance provider for your modern milestones. For jewelry, they offer worldwide coverage, no deductibles, full protection for loss, theft, or even mysterious disappearance, all starting at just $5 a month. Plus, claims are handled quickly with 125% replacement value through your trusted jeweler. Planning your wedding? Brightco offers liability and cancellation coverage tailored to your big day, with flexible prices to match your wedding budget. From meeting venue liability requirements to vendor issues to natural disaster, they've got your back with a simple online process. Visit bright.co/toss for a fast free quote today and unlock peace of mind knowing you're covered. That's brite.co/toss. Trust Brightco for your insurance needs.
All right. And since we are talking all about a very important topic, wedding insurance, we thought it was super important to have an actual expert in to help us answer some of the biggest questions about this topic. So we are so excited to welcome Dustin Lemick, who is the CEO and founder of Brightco. So thank you so much, Dustin, for joining me today.
Thank you so much for having me. I really appreciate it.
All right, so let's start out with the basics, right? Can you just explain in layman's terms, what is wedding insurance and what does it typically cover?
Yeah, absolutely. So at Brightco, we actually offer two different wedding products, wedding insurance products. One is a wedding liability product, which is basically a general liability coverage. It covers the host and honorees, and it also has some broad property damage coverage. The second coverage that we offer is a wedding cancellation product. And that's basically exactly what it sounds like. It covers if the wedding gets unexpectedly canceled or if you have to cancel the wedding. It also covers things like postponement. So if for whatever reason there's unforeseen circumstances and the wedding couple has to postpone the wedding. There's also some really novel coverages in there as well where it'll cover parts of the wedding. So for example, one of your vendors doesn't show up and like the florist doesn't show up and you have to scramble and try to, find a new florist and there's costs associated with that. So your wedding, this product would step in and cover some of those costs for you.
Yeah, it's definitely like a lifesaver to cover things you probably haven't even thought of or wouldn't want to dream of in like your worst nightmares, right? And of course, liability, I think, is something that we should talk a little bit more about because that is protecting you from a lot of different scenarios, right? So can you explain a bit more about the liability portion?
Absolutely. And so both of these coverages, to be honest with you, it's for those unforeseen events. We don't see like there's inclement weather events. There's lots of things that happen that can cause issues with the wedding or cause you to cancel it. But really honing in on the liability piece, things happen during the event, unforeseen things. So you or the honorees, the wedding couple, they're responsible and they're liable for their guests. That product will cover all of the guests that are in attendance. So I'll give you an example.
Great.
Let's say that your father-in-law invited a work associate and that person had a little bit too much to drink and fell on the dance floor. And guess what? They're blaming the honorees, the wedding couple, and they're saying, the venue wasn't secure, there was water on the floor, you're liable, you have to pay for damages and all of these things. That is where a general liability, the wedding liability portion would kick in and trigger, and this policy would cover you for things like that.
So another thing that I think could come into play here is, like property damage, right? Like what sort of examples might be covered under, wedding insurance when it comes to property damage?
Yeah, this is a really good question. So the wedding liability product does offer general property coverage. And so we've heard some interesting stories. I'll give you one where property. So think about like artwork being damaged. Think about rugs being damaged. I mean, you're having a party, people are partying, there's drinking involved, like things happen.
Yeah.
And the one example that I use a lot is, which we heard from one of our venue partners, is somebody was in the women's bathroom and she was sitting on a pedestal in the bathroom, like a sink pedestal, and she was putting her makeup on. Okay, totally normal. And the sink pedestal broke.
Oh no.
And so not only the pedestal broke, but there was potentially flooding involved too. And the venue is going to come and want reimbursement from the wedding couple and the honorees. And so, you know, you don't want to be on the hook for weddings are expensive as they are, and there's a lot of budgeting, and you don't want to have this great wedding and then the next day get a bill for tens of thousands of dollars for flooding. You know, that is what this coverage provides, and it's actually really reasonably priced as well. It's like totally worth it, in my opinion.
Yeah. So does the pricing structure kind of depend on the size of wedding you're planning, like how much you've spent on it? Like, can you talk a little bit about that?
Of course, yeah. So for the liability coverage, it will potentially depend. If you have a really large wedding, there could be some surcharges, but in general, it'll cover up to 500 people at the wedding, and it would cost around $120. So for
Yeah.
$120, you're getting a lot of coverage, and really it's peace of mind. That's
Mm.
really what I tell people. It's like, do you really want to worry about, you know, any of these unforeseen circumstances for
Right.
$120 policy? Like, I think I'm going to buy the $120 policy.
It's a small price to pay for peace of mind, right? Especially in the grand scheme of things when you're considering, your overall budget and what you spent to sort of protect that, I think is totally reasonable and a no-brainer, in my opinion. So when it comes to like other sort of damage situations, I'm curious, and I feel like, people might have like these sort of interesting or like weird questions. So, what about like personal property? Like say like a bridesmaid spills red wine on the bride's wedding dress. Like, is that something that would be covered by wedding insurance?
Yeah, that could be covered as well. And then also spilling wine on anywhere involved in the venue itself. There's all these things that potentially could happen to the venue or to, yeah, certain things like that. Like, so if there was wine that was spilled on the dress and there needed to be a new dress that needed to be purchased last minute or whatever it might be, there would be potentially compensation there as well.
Yeah. I'm thinking of all these like crazy scenarios, like the ring bearer like accidentally runs off with the rings and like loses them or something like that.
One of the novel coverages that Brightco offers, and I believe we're the only ones that offer this, is we actually will cover pets that are involved in the ceremony, a dog or a cat. And this is
Yeah.
a really big trend, actually, where a lot of folks are bringing their
One I
loved
love.
pets.
I love
Y-
seeing, the furry friends in the bridal party.
Yeah, I come completely, and it's great. It's a great idea. But what happens when, you know, the dog has an accident or runs off and chews something, or God forbid, hurts somebody or something like that?
Yeah.
Like, those things actually could happen, and we would cover that as well.
Well, that's amazing. And just another reason why like the peace of mind is so worth it. So let's like pivot and talk about like the cancellation side now. Obviously we talked about sort of like unforeseen events, happening, but like what about things like if someone gets cold feet, like that level of cancellation, like is that something that's covered or not?
So I think all the products that are on the market do not cover that, with the exception of ours. We have an add-on coverage. We call it cancel for any reason.
Wow.
And it basically is that. So you can buy this coverage. It's like 1 to 2% of the total value, the total amount of the wedding, which is also really reasonable.
Yeah.
And it will cover things like cold feet and literally any reason that's not already known. So if you already know that you're going to cancel the event, and you can't go and purchase it at that point, but
Right.
anything before that, right, that obviously, right. But anything else, like, it's really, and we're seeing a lot of folks resonating with this because, again, going back to unforeseen circumstances, things happen, people do get cold feet, or you just decide, you know what, this isn't a good time for us right now. Like, we're
Yeah.
still planning on getting married. This happens all the time. we're still planning on getting married. It's just this timing is not good. We want to push it out another year. We put deposits down on all of these things. We need to cancel or postpone. We would cover that.
Yeah, I mean, that's amazing. I also saw on your website that you guys still have like COVID protection cover, which I think is something that really got eliminated from a lot of the policies that I've seen in a post 2020 world. So I thought that was really amazing as well.
Yeah, that's exactly right. So the wedding cancellation coverage got very popular, and a lot of people started paying attention to it because of COVID.
Yeah.
Unfortunately, nobody covered COVID at the time when it happened, and people lost a lot of money because obviously all these weddings were canceled.
Right.
When we brought our product to market, it was very important to me and to our whole team to make sure that we're really have insanely comprehensive coverage that will be there when you need it, and that includes COVID. So we do, and I believe we're the only ones that do cover COVID. So we would cover if the wedding couple got COVID and they needed to cancel or postpone. We would cover if like the mother or father-in-law got ill and needed to cancel and postpone the wedding. So it's at Brightco, we offer really, really broad coverage for things like that.
Right. That's really amazing. And, like I said, I feel like it's so rare to find that and to truly know that no matter what happens, you're covered, you're safe, and your investment is protected. And so another thing that I saw that I thought was super interesting was in the event that you have to cancel or postpone your wedding, you guys also offer, counseling coverage as well. I thought that was really interesting. I'd love to hear more about that.
Yeah, that is along the same lines of like, we really wanted to think outside the box and provide modern coverage for what we say modern coverage for modern milestones. And so there's these insurance products that are old and they were built and created, 20 years ago. So there's new things that happen in today's world that these coverages need to account for. And counseling is one of those things as well. So look, when people are going through a wedding, there's a lot of stress, there's a lot of things that happen, and truly counseling could be beneficial for a lot of folks. That's why we were like, we should offer this as part of the coverage, and we do.
I love that so much. And I'm such a big proponent of therapy. We always say, like, how do we get sponsored by like therapy? Because we're big fans. And so I really loved seeing that. And you're so right. Obviously, it's such a stressful time. There's so much money invested. And then if you do have to postpone, there's going to be a lot of emotion wrapped up in that. So I think that's very cool. And so from like a redemption standpoint, like how does that work? How would a couple go about like redeeming that sort of like benefit from the coverage?
Yeah. So, I mean, you'd put a claim in with Brightco. We've made it very simple. You go to our website. There's a short little questionnaire that takes 1 minute probably, and that triggers your coverage for you. So you basically just say what happened and what you need. If there was damage or if you needed us to step in to cover the costs of a new photographer or whatever it might be, or you wanted to take advantage of the counseling. And so you would fill that out. You would hear from one of our claims adjusters within 24 hours, but usually right away, especially if there's some emergency situation where, let's be real, like sometimes there is like, I need this now, like I'm getting married tomorrow. And, the florist didn't show up, like I said, we would then be able to work with you right away. We would provide assistance if you needed it in terms of finding a new vendor or whatever the situation might be. So we look at ourselves as really your partner in helping to provide whatever needed to be provided under the coverage at that moment.
Yeah. Oh, speaking of, I know another sort of unique feature is, a deposit protection if a vendor goes out of business, for example. I thought that was really interesting because, I've been in the wedding industry now for almost 17 years, and it can be a very transient industry. Sometimes people switch jobs or go back to like a previous career or, take time off. And so I do think that that's a really handy feature as well. I'd love to hear more about that.
Yeah, I was actually literally just reading an article a couple days ago about a venue, and it was a really nice venue. It was not a private residence, but it was a very large country estate type venue, and it was on the East Coast, and they abruptly went out of business. There was
Oh,
issues
wow.
with the owners had issues with the property, and it was basically foreclosed on. No one knew it.
Mm.
So what happened was they literally overnight canceled. I mean, they went out of business and they canceled every event that was booked. And so these folks, and the article, I mean, was interviewing some of these people, and poor people literally lost tens of thousands of dollars. And some of these folks had their wedding coming up in a couple weeks. So
Yeah.
think about that type of stress. Not only do you have to now find a new venue, but you have now lost quite a bit of money and you have to put new deposits down. So we would step in and cover all of that financial loss we would cover.
Yeah. I mean, if this doesn't convince you that this is a necessary line item in your wedding budget, I don't know what will. So I would love to hear actually some specific examples, if you have some, of like situations where, wedding insurance has like really saved the day for a couple that you guys have worked with.
Yeah, I mean, the first thing that goes to my head, outside of some of the examples we've used on the liability side, is on the cancellation side.
Mm.
So probably the largest coverage that triggers for the cancellation piece or postponement is weather related events.
Mm.
Look, we've seen a lot of very unfortunate, rough weather situations recently, and it's seemingly now every year.
Yeah.
And these things, I mean, some folks might think, I live in Chicago. People might think, well, that's not going to happen, or like, what's the chances? I mean, it happens. Like these, and it's seemingly happening more and more.
Yeah. Well,
So
and like nobody knew that, Asheville would be affected by a hurricane, like some of this stuff
bingo.
is just completely blindsiding, right?
Exactly right. And that's why for a really nominal fee, it's like great peace of mind protection. So to the example is like, you know how many events and weddings were postponed or canceled because of the fires that just happened in Los Angeles?
I can't even
A lot,
imagine. Yeah.
a lot. And so like those are where you are really thankful that you purchase cancellation coverage because you're not out all of that money. So, weather is a big event, and also illness. Like, unfortunately, like there's times when, I mean, COVID, like we talked about, is a very strong example, but there's other examples where you really do, like somebody gets very ill and the wedding couple, and it's not just the wedding couple, it could be other folks. We cover the wedding party, we cover in-laws and your folks and your grandparents. Like if for whatever reason, your grandmother, you're really close to your grandmother and she absolutely needs to be at this event and she got ill and you were like, you know what? I think our best move is just to postpone it. We would cover that. So
Yeah.
those would be some examples.
Yeah, I always say, when you're forming your wedding guest list, like think about the people who you literally would not get married if they couldn't be in attendance. And so knowing that that's an option and you would be protected if in the case that like somebody couldn't attend at the last minute is really powerful. So what about sort of like a funny or like unexpected claim that you've gotten? Have you gotten anything that was like really surprising or funny?
Going back to pet coverage, the dog situation, there was a dog who had an accident on what seemingly was normal carpeting, but it was not normal carpeting. It was quite expensive. And the couple, I think it was close to $15,000 to replace the whole rug area.
Wow.
Yeah, it was much more expensive than folks thought. And so I think it was relatively funny at the time when the dog during the ceremony, like I think it was sort of one of those memorable events. Like, do you remember when the dog did this?
People will be talking about it for years.
People are talking, right. I mean, I think it was humorous. But also at the same time, like we were there to cover it. So they didn't have to worry. But like when it was like, oh, there's a $15,000 bill. Well, no, there's not.
That is some expensive carpet.
Yeah.
So I guess I'm curious, like, how would couples know the amount of coverage they need? Is it really just based on their total investment, or do you have any sort of guidelines that you can provide?
Yeah. So like the base for most folks, the base wedding liability product will cover up to 500 guests, and that's usually enough for most folks. And you can specify if you have more folks than that. And so that's one of those things that will sort of tailor to your coverage. And again, like the base coverage there's $120. For cancellation or postponement, we usually recommend whatever like the payment, whatever the cost of your wedding is, like that's what we would recommend getting coverage for. And the reason being, if like there is some really large event that happens where you basically have lost deposits for everything, for all of your vendors, for your venue, for everything, you're going to want to have full coverage on that. And so for an average wedding in the United States, it's somewhere around $30,000 or $35,000. The cancellation coverage would be like $300 or something like that. And so that's like best, like our guidelines would be like for cancellation, get the full coverage for the full amount of what you're paying for the wedding. And for liability, it's kind of just a base coverage.
Yeah, well, that's amazing advice. Before we wrap up, for couples who might be still sort of on the fence, I can't imagine why they would be, but like, what's your like final pitch for like why couples need this?
The thing that we really hang our hat on is being there in unforeseen circumstances and peace of mind. Like how much, like, what is your peace of mind worth? Like mine is worth a lot. And so, just to like, and during a wedding where there's a lot of things going on, there's a lot of stress. This is one thing you do not need to worry about. You shouldn't need to worry about it. So that's sort of my mindset. That's what I recommend to folks.
Amen. Snaps to that.
Yeah.
Well, this has been so helpful and informative. I know our listeners will probably take a lot away from this. So before I let you go, can you just share a little bit more about where they can find you and find more information about BrightCo?
Yeah, we do everything pretty much digitally. So you can find us right on our website, and there's lots of resources there. You just go to bright.co, brite.co, and there's a little on the top nav, there's wedding insurance, and you can just click on that.
Amazing. Well, thank you so much for joining me, Dustin.
Thank you. I appreciate it.
Well, hopefully that gave everyone a lot of insight into what wedding insurance covers and doesn't, and has given them even more reason to get a policy, protect themselves and the spending that they're doing on their wedding. Mm-hmm. But before we go, should we do a game of Keep It or Toss It?
Let's do it.
Okay.
Outdoor wedding in the summertime.
I'm going to say toss it.
Yeah, because you're just so afraid of rain.
Rain and heat, depending on
where.
Yeah,
the heat is really the problem for me.
Yeah.
Okay. Because we're stipulating that it's in the summertime, I'm going to toss it too. Because I also think your guests just don't want to sit and sweat.
Yeah.
Like that doesn't put anybody in a party mood. Mm-hmm. And I think if you have the ability, like if you have a venue where you can do the ceremony, like let's say you're having a night wedding and you can do the ceremony inside and then move parts of it or have like an indoor-outdoor situation for the reception.
Yep.
Then I think you're giving people the chance to like go and grab some AC for a little bit if they need it, but then also experience the beauty of being outside in the summer.
Yeah.
So maybe that could be like a little happy medium.
It's true.
But nobody wants to be hot.
Right. And if you are going to have outside, having some sort of like fans or cooling station, I don't know.
Yeah. Have you seen like the little people like will have a fan clip on their bouquet, like on the other side of the bouquet?
Oh, yes.
So that they're like holding it and it's like fanning.
Oh, I got a portable fan for when I was at the Eras tour this summer because it was so hot.
Yeah. I mean, I feel like that helps, but why have to need that?
Yeah. Yeah. Keep them cool.
Okay. How about a sparkler wedding exit?
I'm still such a huge fan.
I am tossing that so hard.
Why?
I hate it.
What?
First of all, the fact that that 6 people don't get their hair set on fire every single time it happens boggles my mind. That's really my biggest fear is like people getting set on fire. you have a whole bunch of drunk people holding sparklers. Like, I don't think it's a good idea. I think like the first few times that we saw these pictures, it was really cool. I'm over it. Like, I do think when they spell out like love in the sparkler, like flame, and you get that really cool picture. Yeah, that's really cool. But at this point, you can like manipulate that and do that like
with
Photoshop.
AI. Anything can be done with AI now.
Yeah, or Photoshop. So I don't like it.
Well, I'm sorry to hear that, but I'm still a huge fan of a sparkler exit. I think it's magical, and I do hear your point about drunk people with pyrotechnics or whatever. But there's a savvy way to get around that.
Tell us.
So we have had, I don't know if you remember back in the day, we had Megan Lane Graw, who's a photographer on the show, and she shared a tip with us on the blog, actually, that was all about doing a staged wedding exit.
Okay.
So you do it at the beginning of the reception while all of your guests are still there, because a lot of people trickle out and leave.
But isn't it
before the
light
end.
out then?
Not always. And obviously it'll depend on where in the country you are, what time of year, whatever. But as long as it's dark outside and you can get the photos before everyone gets too tipsy. And then also the photographer can get a few dance floor shots and then go home early, because everybody gets sloppy at a certain point, and those photos are not necessarily the ones you want in your wedding album.
That's fair. I hear you, but I raise you. As a guest, you're like the user experience, if you will, of like having to fake an exit in the middle of a party, like that's not fun for me.
Okay, well, I disagree.
Like, I just feel like as a guest, you're like, oh, we're so obviously doing a thing for the photos rather than like just like letting the night happen.
I get it.
Yeah.
But, to each their own.
Absolutely. Yeah. Okay, next one. Keep it or toss it. A cocktail style reception.
I would say toss.
I'm keeping it.
Yeah.
I think it's a choice. Like, it's a vibe check.
Right.
If that's a vibe you're okay with. But I do think like at least maybe it's like in, the Northeast, but the cocktail hour is like one of the most anticipated parts of the reception, I feel like. Getting to try like all the different food and just like stand around and talk and chat. And I think if a priority for you is not the dance floor, if like you're worried that like you need a photo booth or like you need activities for people to do because you don't know that they're going to be on the dance floor, I do really feel like this is a good option for that, because it puts more of like the like social party vibe back into it rather than having people just sitting at all these separate tables.
Yeah.
And then it's like a little bit different, and you don't have to like worry about if you're concerned about like a lull or something like that. This just, I don't know, takes it away.
I think it's definitely a choice, especially if, your venue feels like that more sort of like adult like vibe. If you're having an adult only reception, obviously like that would work for you. But I always kind of think about like your elderly family members. Are they going to want to stand all night? Or would they rather be able to sit while they eat, a meal? And so that's the only reason, really, I say toss. But
I wonder
for the right group of people and the right vibe, and if you want a no kids wedding, like cocktail could totally work for you.
Yeah, I'm. Part of me feels like people probably agree with you because I don't think we see like packages for that.
Yeah, it's not as common.
And sometimes I wonder like why. I mean, obviously, they're not going to make as much money like as a venue, but I sometimes do wonder like why that's not an option. There's family style or there's like buffet style or all these things, but like as a package, I don't really feel like you see just like longer than the hour for cocktail.
Right, because they want to push you to just do the cocktail hour with the added bar costs and everything else on top of the dinner.
On top of the meal.
Yeah.
Right.
There are plenty of weddings that serve, heavy hors d'oeuvres or whatever, and not even like a full meal. So, of course, it can be enough to fill someone up.
Yeah, and you
just
could
cocktail style.
Yeah, like you could do different, like you could do like the typical hors d'oeuvres that you would serve like cocktail style first, and then do more like the heavy ones, and then do like dessert. Cocktail style.
Completely.
I don't know. Do it. It's cool. And then the last one is a dry reception.
Toss.
Yeah, I'm gonna toss too. I think like having mocktails and having options for people that are choosing not to partake in alcohol is like let's make that more of a thing. Like let's be a little bit more cognizant of that, I think.
Yeah, and courteous.
Yeah, and having like, you know, maybe your signature drink, if you're doing one, like having a mocktail style version of it, where it's just already like a possibility and no one has to like ask for it separately, I think could be a cool like way to acknowledge that. But I do think like, let's trust that people can drink responsibly and like get the party going.
Yeah, and I just like having a celebratory beverage for a celebratory occasion.
What's your go-to?
I mean, I like a bubbly, you know?
Yeah, like a champagne moment.
Yeah, Prosecco, something.
Yeah, like when else are you going to just like drink Prosecco all night?
Yeah, it's fun. It's a
At
vibe.
a wedding. Weddings are the best.
We should do a whole episode on mocktails, though.
On wedding, on champagne. No, on mocktails. Yeah, well, let's do that.
Let's do that.
So I hope that this helped give everybody an idea of what exactly is wedding insurance and the encouragement to look into actually buying it.
Yes, protect your peace of mind. Absolutely. Well, until next time.
See you soon. Thanks for tuning in to The Bouquet Toss from the team at thebudgetsavvybride.com. The Bouquet Toss is a Love Stories TV podcast.
Your support for the show makes it all possible, so don't forget to rate, review, and subscribe on your favorite streaming platform and follow Budget Savvy Bride on social media.
As always, stay savvy and stay tuned for our next episode.
This episode is brought to you by Brightco. From your engagement ring to your wedding day, protect your most cherished memories with Brightco. Visit bright.co/toss for a fast, free quote today and unlock peace of mind knowing you're covered.